everybody. Welcome to the Astoria Bookshop, for those of you who haven't been here before. We're here with Aida Zilelian for The Legacy of Lost Things. And we're happy that she's here after going on tour. She's also the founder, and she runs the Boundless Tales reading series, which we're happy to be a part of as well. And we just ask that so that we can keep doing these free events and author readings, that if you have not already purchased your copy, we have them for sale. We love to support local authors. We love to be supported by local authors. So we like doing these kinds of things. So let's welcome Aida.
Glad to see you guys. Thanks for coming. As you know, the book is primarily about a family who comes and moves here from Beirut. And I usually focus on reading about a love story, a forbidden love story between two main characters. But I think I'm going to read something very different. So the main character is a young girl who runs away to the Midwest. And I don't really talk about her all that much. But I think this section is very, very important. So she comes from sort of a dysfunctional family, and she chooses to run away, and her name is Aida, and she runs away with her friend Cecily, and they are very, very different. They're from Queens, New York, and prior to what I'm about to read, they have a very awful evening in the Midwest where they're almost grabbed and taken by these two men, and they manage to escape. And it's Araxi's fault. She gets them into this mess. So this is where I'm going to be reading from. And she's in a hotel room. And she should be with her friends. And this is the morning, but she wakes up and she realizes that things are very, very different. So there's some cursing in here. And I'll do my best for my mother's sensibilities to curtail the cursing. She'll forget all about it, let's face it. She could not have guessed that in a few short years she would find herself driving through unknown towns with the same girl who had befriended her. Checkout time is in an hour, she heard when she picked up the phone. The woman's voice sounded distant and tinny like an operator. Cess? She turned around and sat up in bed, listening for the sounds of movement. The drawn curtains made the room feel as if she had been overcast with a large imposing shadow. She leaned over and pulled one open slightly. Cecily? The eerie calmness in the room made her anxious. She got up and went to the bathroom. There was no sign of Cecily. Her things were also gone. She called the front desk. There was a girl who left a few hours ago, the woman said. Has the room been paid for? Araxi asked. No, the woman said. Minutes later, she was packed and standing in the lobby. By the time she finished paying for the room, she had less than $300 left. She tried not to think of all the hours of babysitting, the tedium of time she had had to suffer in order to save her money and finally leave home. It had been far more simple for Cecily. She had withdrawn money from her savings account weeks before they had planned on leaving, knowing her mother wouldn't bother checking. As she walked onto the street, a hot wind grazed over her. The streets were empty. St. Louis was not the rambunctious city she had imagined it would be. In the midst of luxury hotels and corporate buildings were empty lots filled with the noise of construction work. She could hear the faint roaring of bulldozers and jackhammers echoing through the desolate cement blocks. She walked slowly at first, struggling to digest her new predicament and wondering what to do. For a moment she stopped and looked up at the gray clouded sky, and with an immediate certainty she realized that her friend had left her and was not coming back. When her money ran out, which it eventually would, she could not bear the thought of returning home. She imagined having to make a collect phone call and asking her parents to send her money so she could buy a bus ticket. The humiliation of surrender was as intense as her absolute revulsion toward her parents. And that goddamn man, he had said his name was Tom Jones. He had told her that he and his 11-year-old daughter had lived in a homeless shelter and that his family had refused to take them in after his wife had died of cancer. She had felt sorry for him. Araxi looked up at the sky and wanted to scream. She wondered if anyone would hear her. Now she quickened her steps, tangled in her thoughts. She stalked through the streets, wandering in aimless circles, and then from a distance saw a man walking ahead of her. He looked homeless and moved with a slight limp. He stopped for a moment to light a cigarette, and from his profile she saw that it was Tom, and for a moment she stood breathless. "Hey, you motherfucker," she screamed. She waited for the man to turn around, and before she could see his reaction, she had dropped her duffel bag and was running toward him in a wild sprint. She felt the hard ground beneath her feet as she pounded across the empty lot. When she got closer, she saw a large rock on the ground and hurled it at him as if she were throwing a baseball. The rock hit the man on the side of his face, and he almost fell to the ground. She had reached him by then and shoved him down. He fell on his back, and Araxi stood over him, kicking him in the face and ribs, shaking with an uncontrollable mania that had taken her over. "You motherfucker," she screamed. "I'm gonna fucking kill you." Eventually, the man stood up and grabbed her by the wrist, trying to chokehold her arm around her neck. "You little bitch," he said through his gritted teeth. "You little fucking bitch." She could smell his sour body odor and the stink of cigarettes and liquor. She bit his hand, and when he pulled it away, she managed to grab another rock, a larger one, and hit him until he fell to the ground again. She sat on top of him, punching. With his free hand, he hit her with his fist, and despite feeling the blow to her face, the piercing pain of it, she didn't falter. She saw a large rock a few inches away, and without much strain, she grabbed it. "Who's the little bitch now?" she screamed, and slammed the rock with all her might on the man's skull. He groaned. She raised the rock above her head again, the weight of it in her hand so heavy that it almost fell from her grip, and again she heaved it down. She sat for a moment, watching the blood seeping from his head. His legs were no longer moving. She knew that he was dead. So that's the part I always avoid reading. But I thought it was necessary to read that part again. And so here is her friend who has abandoned her, Cecily, and we see what she's been up to, because she just left her in a hotel room. After leaving the parking lot, Cecily had driven 5 miles before getting off at a random exit and finding a diner. She sat at a booth drinking coffee and watching the sky begin to lighten. It was the first time she had been without Araxi since they had left New York. She imagined Araxi waking up and realizing she was alone and probably calling the front desk to find out if she had checked out. It's what any person would do. Cecily wanted to go back, but she did not know how to explain her disappearance. She could lie and say she'd gone to fill up the car with gas, or that she'd been looking at the car from the hotel window and that she saw someone breaking in, but the thought of continuing where they had left off and driving aimlessly with no hope of going back seemed impossible to fathom. That is what had propelled her to buy the calling card and call Araxi's house. She hoped Sophie would answer the phone, and that by speaking to her, she would be committing herself to bringing Araxi back home. What she hadn't predicted was that her mother would have tried contacting Araxi's family. It unnerved her. For most of her teenage years, her parents had been strangely detached from her, or rather, too involved in their own lives to take notice of hers. Her father, an attorney, had always worked long hours, and her mother's drinking had become progressively worse. Although she was given complete freedom by the time she had entered junior high, she envied her classmates who complained about having to wait for their parents to pick them up after school. During lunch at school, she would hear them grumble about how they had to endure sitting through a family dinner when they would much rather be on the phone in their bedrooms eating takeout Chinese or pizza. In contrast, Cecily would walk to the bus stop by herself and sit through the 45-minute ride to be deposited in front of her house when she knew that her mother was home and could have easily driven to school to get there. Often her father wasn't home in time to eat dinner, and her mother would leave out an assortment of menus alongside a $20 bill for her. It wasn't a life she particularly looked forward to returning to. Cecily got in the car and drove back to the hotel. It was early enough that she could get away with telling Araxi she'd gone out to buy breakfast. She hoped Araxi was still sleeping, but as she turned onto the block that led to the hotel, she saw her trudging down the block with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "Araxi!" she yelled. Araxi stopped walking and looked around for a moment, and once she saw it was Cecily, her face grew cold and she kept walking. Cecily drove up to her, gently pushed open the passenger seat door and kept following her. "I'm sorry, I was just mad. Please get in." Araxi kept walking, then stopped and got in the car. Cecily drove toward the highway and stayed quiet, but then noticed the bruise. "What the hell happened to you?" Autoxy wouldn't speak, and then she said, "You know what? Pull over. I want to get out of this goddamn car." Ignoring her, Cecily kept driving. "What the hell happened to you?" she asked. She felt a sudden blow to the side of her head and almost hit the car in front of her. She turned to look at Autoxy. She was raising her hand to hit her again, and before she could, Cecily blocked her with her free hand. "Stop," she yelled. "Stop. You left me." It was beyond an accusation. It was a shriek as if she were terrified. "You fucking asshole." "I'm sorry," I said. Cecily turned on the radio and lowered the windows. She gripped the steering wheel, hoping to wring the shaking of her hands. She tried to choke down a sob. "I hate you," she heard, like a low, soft murmur. She turned to look at Autoxy. She was staring out of the window dully. The tall buildings blurred past them as Cecily drove, and the landscape turned flat again. The sharp smell of manure filled the air when they drove past a cow farm, and neither of them spoke. So that's what's happening in the Midwest. And the last section I was going to read, should I read this section? Let me see. I'm going to read this one section, and then we're done, because this flashes back to New York and the little sister who she has left behind, who she doesn't know where her sister is right now. Sophie lay in bed wondering who had called the house at such an early hour, and was tempted to wake her mother in case she knew. Instead, she went to the living room to watch TV. Her friend was away with her father upstate for 2 weeks, and Sophie knew she had many long hours of boredom to contend with. As she flipped through the channels, thinking of how to spend her time, the phone rang. She reached over toward the table lamp and answered it before it could ring a second time. "Hello," she said. "Hello," a woman said. "Who is this?" "This is Sophie. Who is this?" Despite the fact that it was an early morning, the woman sounded alert. "This is Penny Gridore. I'm Cecily's mother. Do you know Cecily?" A slow panic crept into Sophie's stomach. "Yes, I know her. Are you her mother?" "I just said that. Yes, I am," the woman said. "Have you seen her?" "Cecily?" Sophie managed to say. She began to cry. "Yes," the woman hissed impatiently. "Who else could I be talking about? Have you seen her?" "No," Sophie said, "I haven't." And before she could ask the woman if she had seen Autoxy, the woman said, "Well, I have a pretty good idea that Cecily and your sister ran off together." "Cecily's gone?" "For over a month now, yes. She disappeared, took her grandfather's car and drove off in the middle of the night. I called the police and they weren't able to trace her. I've been looking through her things and I found something your sister must have written her, a little poem or something. I guess they're friends?" "Is that why you think my sister is with her?" Sophie asked. "Yes, that. And because as brilliant as my daughter is," the woman said sarcastically, "she can't pull anything off by herself. She always finds someone to buddy up with, and as far as I know, Autoxy's her only person that she's friends with at school." "Autoxy also disappeared," she said, and before she could continue, she began to cry. "We called the police that morning, and now they're declaring her missing. There's nothing we can do." "Oh gosh," the woman's voice softened. "Honey, are your parents around? Can I talk to one of them? Maybe we can figure out where they went." "Hang on," Sophie said. "My mom's still in bed." "She's always in bed," she said, unable to catch herself. She kept going. "She's been terrible since Autoxy left. I'm going to try to wake her up. Can you please hold on?" She walked down the hallway with the phone in her hand and without knocking went into her parents' bedroom. Her mother was lying on her side sleeping. "Mom," she whispered. After a moment, she shook her mother's elbow. "Mom," she said loudly. Her mother turned over. She scowled at Sophie. "What is it?" she mumbled. "I'm sleeping." "Autoxy's friend's mother called. She's on the phone. She wants to talk to you. She thinks they ran away together." She thrust the phone at her mother and sat on the bed waiting to hear the exchange. Her mother sat up and pushed her hair out of her face. "Hello?" She cleared her throat as she listened to the other end. "Yes, for 5 weeks. We called the police." Pause. "In the morning." Another pause. "Yes, they said there's nothing we can do." Sophie could hear Mrs. Gridore's voice from the other end of the line. The words were unclear. "Yes, I will, and please do the same." "Okay, thank you." Her mother hung up the phone. "What did she say?" "They left together," her mother said. She sat with a dazed expression. "I'll call your father, although what difference would it make? She's gone." Sophie went back to her room and pulled open one of her bureau drawers. She reached towards the back of the drawer until she felt the smooth, hard surface. For years, she had kept this wooden music box buried behind a mound of stray socks that she had resisted throwing away. She knew the tune by heart. It was a theme song to the movie The Love Story. Their mother had given it to Araxi as a gift years ago, and when Sophie had opened it for the first time, she was startled by the tiny ballerina that sprung up from beneath the lid and twirled around in a brief frenzy. She remembered touching the crimson red velvet lining of the box, the pleasant feel of the soft fabric, unexpected and soothing. Now she lifted the box and placed it on her head. She had not wound up the lever on the side and knew that there would be no music or burst of dancing. She opened the lid, and inside was a small piece of neatly folded paper that she occasionally opened and read. She had never shown the writing to her parents, nor did she still find any reason to. Her sister's small, slanted handwriting filled only the first 2 lines of the page. Hi, Sophie. Please don't be scared when you see that I'm gone. I'll be fine, and I will call or write you as soon as it's okay. Love, Araxi. Thank you. This has become a reading tradition. Go sit next to that. Maybe somebody has a question. You guys have been to my readings before, so I've definitely done Q&A with many of you, but if any of you have questions still, if you haven't read the book and you have more questions, or you had read it and you have questions, now would definitely, I'd love to take any questions that anyone would have.
I do. First of all, thank you so much. I just finished it. It's so beautifully written, and I think what I appreciate most is how you allow the underneath of things to be revealed, because I think that, we sort of walk through this life not revealing those things. So I just appreciated that so much. So I'm so glad that you read the section that you did, because when I got to page 54, and I know it's page 54 because I went, what? I'm wondering why. So Araxi is like such a strong character, and that's like that's huge that she makes that choice. Like, how do you think that functions in terms of her journey and what happens to her?
That's a really good question. I think that she obviously didn't realize it's something that she was going to do, so the guilt definitely gnaws away at her as you read the book. But the issue with her, she really just is a Coke bottle that's been shaken too many times, because, you have her grandfather escaped the genocide. He was a very violent man. She sees the violence in her home. She's this very pent-up kid. And now the one person that's left does what she does and leaves her, and she just flips out on this homeless guy whose fault it was in the first place, because this is the man who tried to abduct them the night before. So she sees him, and it becomes this perfect plug where the violence can finally be let go of, but now she has like a new basket of problems to deal with, because she obviously has to worry about being caught. I mean, they're going to find the body. So she can't feel free anymore on this journey, because this guilt is going to eat away at her. So, I mean, you've read it. You see how it works out.
I do. And can I ask more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. In the legacy of Lost Things, because I kept thinking about the title and how. Oh, well, first let me ask you: how did you decide? So it's not linear in time.
No.
And each of the chapters are named after each of the characters, and they repeat. Mm-hmm. So how do you think that like, how did you come to make those choices as a writer, and how do you think that influences the way that the story unfolds?
I felt like if I wrote it only from the perspective of one character, that no one else was going to see what the other's point of view was. So that was that first decision. Second of all, to write it in a linear fashion was going to be, I felt like, boring. Mm-hmm. I felt like there needed to be a puzzle that needed to be assembled at the end, so it all fell together.
So thinking about the legacy, like it's very moving as a reader when you consider each character and what they've lost. Like, you learn that throughout the book. And that kept coming back to me when I would reconsider the title as I moved through the book. Do you think at least for Araxi, that she has been found in some way. I don't want there to be spoilers for anybody who hasn't read it, but like at the end, like, do you think that she has, or do you feel as a writer that that's really up for us to decide as a reader?
That is up for you guys to decide. I mean, who's read it? Has anyone read it all the way through? Okay, so has she figured it out at the end, or has she figured out that she has to figure it out?
And I kind of love that. Yeah.
Right? She don't think she's figured it out. And I think that's why I left it that way, because that's okay.
Yeah.
See, the thing is that I wrote The Hallowing Moon. Before this, The Hallowing Moon wasn't published. That's all from Araxi's point of view. That's all her. And the book leaves off there where she decides not to go back home. And a lot of agents didn't want that ending, and they didn't take the book. They said, you have to change it. She has to go back home. And I said, I don't want her to. And they didn't like that. They wanted it to end. You know, I mean, they want the dust to settle, but I just left the dust in the air. Her friend gets back on the bus, and that's the end of it. And I didn't want to change that, and that's probably one of the couple of reasons that it wasn't picked up. Plus, it's young adult, which is a narrower genre. But that's it still ends open-ended. I mean, there is that resolve, but not complete. And I'm hoping that that's not unsettling for readers, but it's sort of like they're more accepting of the uncertainty. Yeah.
Can I keep going? How has this been received by the Armenian community in Queens? Do they have identification? Do you get that response?
Yes, and it's great because there's an Armenian event coming up that my mom actually helped organize, and that's going to be a huge event. But I was just in Rhode Island, and they were really interested in it because the genocide came and went, and I think the genocide topic has been so belabored because it was the 100 commemoration, and I think they found it refreshing that this was not a genocide book. So for that reason also, and it also speaks to, I think, Armenians more of my age, because it shows about dysfunction of people from my generation who are Armenian, because the Armenian community, you don't talk about unhappiness in your household. You don't discuss those things. It's taboo. So I think that addresses that.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe some Armenians would not appreciate it, but I think others do. That's a good question. Does anyone else have questions, Joan?
Yeah, I absolutely loved the book. I was riveted. I couldn't put it down.
Thank you.
I loved your interview also with that. Very much like the
Oh, great.
Fabulous. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. The thing that I love is like the thread that runs through. It's funny how about us being conscious of our choices, the choices that we make, how it affects our children. And that I think that's how it affected like Araxi's trajectory.
Yes.
You know, with the whole thing, the unrequited love of the and it's so because culture, when you come from an older generation, the generation you kind of like were locked in because they wanted this cultural expectations coming to this country, and so you still there wasn't even a financial independence. You just do what your family expects of you.
Yeah.
And then when we don't follow our heart's longing,
Yeah.
you know, that whole, and you kind of like go off track, it affects everything.
It does, and she doesn't even consider, maybe I should marry this guy that my parents don't like, and maybe they should disown me. It doesn't even cross her mind to do it. It's not even an option. In her mind, I have to not marry this person. I have, she doesn't even struggle with, maybe I should be disowned. It's not a possibility for her. It becomes a possibility for probably Araxi's generation, my generation, but it wasn't for her. So, yeah. Thank you.
I have one more. What do you hope is not lost by you having written this book?
Oh my gosh, you should be a reporter. The fact that dysfunctions exist in every culture, that's something that I think is really important and people take for granted. American culture, it's very open, it's very accepted, but in other more traditional cultures, you don't talk about those things. And I just want that one part not to be lost, that this is common in every culture. So that's a great question. Thank you.
That's so evident throughout the whole
Yeah,
book. Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming. I know it's a beautiful Sunday at 5. You guys are awesome for being here. And I think this is the end of our reading. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
For having
Thank all of
me.
you for coming. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And if you haven't bought your book, you have them up front. If you have, good, you were on top of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.